close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Caribbean more than 300 years ago, before cruise ships crossed these waters, before tourists filled the beaches, before maps were complete, and before governments truly controlled the sea. It is a warm night in the early 18th century. The ocean stretches endlessly beneath the stars. The surface of the water glows faintly in the darkness. Every movement of the waves leaves behind trails of pale light. The sky above is crowded with stars brighter than most people today will ever see. There are no city lights, no engines, no distant aircraft, only wind, water, and the creaking sound of wooden ships crossing one of the most dangerous regions on Earth. Now, imagine standing on the deck of a merchant vessel. Your ship is heavy with cargo, perhaps sugar from Jamaica, perhaps tobacco from Virginia, perhaps silver from the Spanish colonies. The crew is tired. The voyage has already been long. And then someone spots something in the darkness. A shape, a sail, a ship where no ship should be. At first it seems harmless, but then it gets closer and closer. No lanterns reveal its position. No friendly signal appears. Only silence, and the growing certainty that whoever commands that vessel does not wish to be seen. Your heartbeat begins to quicken, because in this age there is one possibility that every sailor fears. Pirates. Today most people hear that word and immediately think of adventure. Treasure maps, hidden islands, colorful flags, and larger-than-life characters from movies and novels. But the real history of Caribbean piracy is far more fascinating than fiction, because it actually happened. Real men and women sailed these waters. Real fortunes were stolen. Real cities trembled in fear. And for a brief period in history, pirates became powerful enough to challenge entire empires. To understand how that happened, we must begin long before Blackbeard, long before Nassau became famous, long before pirate flags appeared above Caribbean horizons. We must begin with the creation of the world that made piracy possible. The story starts in 1492, when Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic Ocean. His voyage changed history forever. European kingdoms had known little about the Americas before that moment. But after Columbus returned, everything changed. Spain moved quickly. Explorers arrived. Conquistadors followed. And within decades, an enormous empire began to emerge across the Americas. The scale of Spanish success was astonishing. Vast territories fell under Spanish control. Rich cities were conquered. Powerful indigenous civilizations were destroyed, and unimaginable wealth began flowing across the Atlantic. Silver poured out of mines in Mexico. Silver poured out of Peru. Gold arrived from countless sources. Precious stones, pearls, exotic products, resources that European rulers could scarcely believe existed. The Caribbean became the gateway to all of it. Every year fleets crossed these waters carrying treasure toward Europe, and that treasure transformed the world. The silver alone changed global trade. It fueled economies, funded armies, paid for wars, built cities, and turned Spain into the dominant power of its age. But enormous wealth creates enormous temptation. The same treasure that enriched Spain attracted enemies. And Spain had many enemies. France wanted to share. England wanted to share. The Dutch wanted to share. None of them liked watching Spanish ships carry fortunes across the ocean while they received nothing. At first, these rival nations fought Spain indirectly, rather than sending huge fleets to challenge Spanish power directly. They relied on a different kind of weapon. Privateers. A privateer looked very much like a pirate. He sailed armed ships. He attacked enemy vessels. He seized cargo, and he often became rich through plunder. The difference was legality. A privateer possessed official permission from a government, a document known as a letter of marque. as long as he attacked approved enemies. His actions were considered lawful warfare. From Spain's perspective, this distinction meant very little. A privateer stealing Spanish treasure felt exactly like a pirate. But for England, France, or the Netherlands, privateers provided a cheap and effective way to weaken Spanish power. The Caribbean became crowded with them. French privateers raided shipping. English privateers attacked ports. Dutch captains hunted Spanish commerce wherever they found it. Every successful raid encouraged more men to join. Every captured ship proved that fortunes could be won through violence at sea. And slowly the line between privateer and pirate began to blur. Many men crossed it without hesitation. Because peace treaties created a problem, a privateer might spend years fighting Spain. Then suddenly a treaty would be signed in Europe. The war would end. His commission would become worthless, and his income would disappear overnight. What happened next was often predictable. Some returned to ordinary life, but many did not. They still had ships, weapons, experience, and crews accustomed to living through plunder. The temptation to continue was difficult to resist, especially when Spanish treasures still sailed nearby, waiting to be taken. The Caribbean itself encouraged piracy. The geography seemed almost designed for it. Thousands of islands scattered across immense distances. Hidden coves, remote beaches, uncharted channels, protected anchorages. A captain who knew these waters could disappear with remarkable ease. A pirate ship might attack in the morning and vanish by nightfall. Merchants dreaded this environment. Governments struggled to police it, and ambitious sailors recognized opportunity. Meanwhile, new colonies appeared throughout the region. England established settlements. France established settlements. The Dutch established settlements. Many islands that Spain ignored became homes for rival powers. Sugar plantations expanded rapidly. Trade increased. Shipping multiplied. And every ship represented potential profit. The Caribbean became one of the busiest commercial regions in the world, which also made it one of the most attractive hunting grounds imaginable. For generations, violence became a normal part of life here. Privateering, smuggling, piracy. These activities overlapped constantly. A man could move from one category to another with surprising ease. One year, he might serve a government. The next year, he might rob ships for himself. And in some ports, nobody seemed particularly concerned about the distinction. No place symbolized this reality more clearly than Port Royal. Few cities in history gained a reputation as extraordinary as Port Royal. Located on the island of Jamaica, the settlement occupied a narrow strip of land guarding one of the finest natural harbors in the Caribbean. Its location was ideal. Ships could enter safely, cargo could be loaded efficiently, and defenses protected the harbor entrance. When England captured Jamaica from Spain in 1655, the island immediately became important, but also faced danger. Spanish forces might attempt to retake it. England lacked resources to maintain massive military forces there. So colonial officials embraced an unusual solution. They encouraged privateers to use Jamaica as their base. The logic seemed simple. Privateers would attack Spanish shipping, enrich themselves, and simultaneously help defend the colony. Everyone benefited, at least in theory. The result was explosive growth. Port Royal expanded rapidly. Merchants arrived, sailors arrived, adventurers arrived, and so did men who preferred living outside conventional law. Money flooded into the town. Captured cargo passed through its warehouses. Prize ships entered the harbor constantly. Taverns multiplied. Businesses thrived. And stories about the city's wealth spread across the Atlantic world. Visitors could scarcely believe what they saw. Gold coins circulated freely. Silver changed hands every day. Men who had been poor sailors only months earlier suddenly possessed fortunes. And many spent that wealth as quickly as they acquired it. The city's reputation grew accordingly. Observers described astonishing levels of drinking, gambling, luxury, and vice. Some claimed there was no city in the Americas where money disappeared faster. Others insisted no place on earth contained so many opportunities for temptation. Whether those descriptions were exaggerated or not, Port Royal became famous. Its name traveled far beyond the Caribbean. People who had never seen Jamaica still knew stories about the city. Some viewed it as a paradise of opportunity. Others viewed it as a den of corruption. Many called it the wickedest city on earth. And perhaps no figure embodied Port Royal's rise more completely than Henry Morgan. Long before Blackbeard terrified merchants, Henry Morgan had already become a legend. Unlike the pirates who would later dominate popular imagination, Morgan operated as a privateer, at least officially, but the distinction often seemed academic to those who suffered from his attacks. Morgan was ambitious, fearless, and extraordinarily capable. He understood warfare, leadership, and the psychology of intimidation. Under his command, large fleets launched raids against Spanish settlements throughout the Caribbean. These were not small robberies. They resembled military campaigns. Hundreds of men participated. Complex plans were developed. Entire cities became targets. One of Morgan's most famous victories occurred at Portobello, a heavily fortified Spanish city on the coast of Panama. Many considered its defenses nearly impossible to overcome. Morgan disagreed. His forces attacked boldly, captured key positions, and eventually seized the city itself. The victory shocked the Spanish Empire. News traveled rapidly, and Morgan's reputation soared. He became a hero to some, a villain to others. But everyone knew his name. Success brought greater ambition. Larger expeditions followed. More victories, more wealth, more fame. Each triumph reinforced the belief that enormous fortunes remained available for those willing to take risks. And risk defined every aspect of life in the Caribbean, because prosperity always existed alongside danger. A pirate might become rich, or he might die tomorrow. A city might flourish, or disappear overnight. And nowhere was that truth demonstrated more dramatically than Port Royal itself. By the late 17th century, the city stood at the height of its power. Its streets bustled with activity. Its harbor overflowed with ships. Its merchants accumulated fortunes. Its taverns never seemed to close. People arrived from every corner of the Atlantic world, seeking wealth, adventure, or escape. Then disaster struck. On the morning of June 7th, 1692, without warning, the earth began to shake. At first, many residents probably struggled to understand what was happening. Then the shaking intensified. Buildings collapsed. Walls cracked. Panic spread instantly. But the earthquake itself was only the beginning. Much of Port Royal stood upon unstable sandy ground. As the earth moved, the soil lost its strength. Entire sections of the city began sinking into the sea. Streets disappeared. Homes vanished. Warehouses collapsed into the harbor. People who had been standing safely moments earlier suddenly found themselves swallowed by water. And then came the waves. A tsunami swept through the area, adding further destruction. Within minutes, one of the wealthiest cities in the Americas had been devastated. Thousands died. Thousands more suffered injuries. The survivors struggled to comprehend what had happened. For many observers, the disaster seemed almost biblical. Religious leaders interpreted it as divine punishment. They pointed to Port Royal's reputation, its excesses, its vice, its association with pirates and privateers, and declared that judgment had arrived, whether one accepted that explanation or not. The consequences were undeniable. Port Royal never fully recovered. Its era as the great pirate capital of the Caribbean was ending, but piracy itself was not. In many ways, it was only beginning to enter its most famous chapter, because while Port Royal declined, a new generation of pirates was preparing to rise. Men whose names would become immortal, men like Blackbeard. And as the old world of privateers faded, the true Golden Age of Piracy moved closer. And with it came some of the most remarkable stories in maritime history. Port Royal's decline did not end piracy. If anything, the destruction of the city helped push the pirate world into a new phase. The old generation of privateers had thrived during years of imperial conflict. They operated in a gray zone where governments often looked the other way. As long as Spanish ships suffered losses, authorities could tolerate a great deal. But the political landscape was changing. European powers signed treaties. Wars ended, and governments increasingly wanted stability rather than chaos. For thousands of sailors, this created a problem. During wartime, a skilled seaman could find work aboard privateering vessels. There was danger, certainly, but there was also opportunity. When peace arrived, those opportunities vanished almost overnight. Many sailors returned to merchant service and quickly discovered that legitimate employment often offered little reward. Conditions aboard merchant ships were brutal. Captains exercised near absolute authority. Food was poor, pay was low, punishments could be savage. A sailor might spend years at sea and still remain trapped in poverty. For some men, piracy began to look less like a crime and more like an alternative career, a dangerous one, but potentially far more rewarding. At the same time, the Caribbean remained filled with tempting targets. Merchant vessels crossed the region constantly, loaded with sugar, tobacco, indigo, textiles, rum, silver, and countless other goods. Every horizon offered possibility. Every shipping lane represented opportunity. The ingredients were all present. Experienced sailors, weak enforcement, profitable targets, and isolated islands where authorities struggled to maintain control. What emerged during the early 18th century was something remarkable. A pirate culture unlike anything that had existed before. These pirates were not merely criminals acting alone. They formed communities, shared customs, and developed systems of government that surprised many observers. The popular image of pirates often focuses on violence, and violence was certainly part of their world. But pirate ships also depended upon cooperation. No vessel could survive long if every dispute ended in bloodshed. No captain could succeed if his crew hated him. No expedition could function without some form of order. The solution was a system that looked surprisingly democratic, especially by the standards of the early 18th century. Most governments of the era offered ordinary people very little political influence. Kings ruled empires. Aristocrats controlled land. Common laborers obeyed orders. But aboard many pirate ships, things worked differently. Before a voyage began, crews often agreed upon written articles. These documents served as contracts. They established rules, responsibilities, rewards, and punishments. Every crew member understood the terms before joining. In effect, pirates created miniature societies floating upon the sea. The captain held authority, but not unlimited authority. That distinction mattered enormously. On a merchant vessel, a captain's power could be nearly absolute. On a pirate ship, a captain remained dependent upon the confidence of his crew. If sailors believed he was incompetent, cowardly, or unfair, they could remove him and elect someone else. Such events were not rare. Captains who failed to deliver results often found themselves replaced. Leadership depended upon performance, not birth, not wealth, and not noble titles. This arrangement shocked many contemporary observers because it contradicted assumptions about hierarchy. Pirates were criminals, yet in some respects they enjoyed greater participation in decision-making than many law-abiding citizens. Major questions often went before the crew: whether to attack a target, where to sail, how to divide resources. Important choices could involve collective discussion. This did not make pirate society peaceful or enlightened, but it did make it unusual. The division of plunder reflected similar principles. When a prize was captured, the proceeds were distributed according to predetermined rules. Captains received larger shares, so did certain officers. But the differences remained relatively modest compared with conventional maritime employment. Ordinary sailors benefited directly from success. They risked their lives, and they expected compensation. This created powerful incentives. A pirate crew fought not merely for a distant employer, but for itself. The system extended even further. Many pirate crews established compensation for injuries. A man who lost an arm, a leg, or suffered permanent disability received payment from communal funds. In effect, pirates created rudimentary insurance systems, long before such protections became common elsewhere. Again, this was not motivated by idealism. Witnesses described a figure who seemed less like a man and more like something supernatural. Exactly the impression Teach wanted. Fear saved lives, at least from his perspective. If merchant crews surrendered immediately, no battle became necessary. No pirate risked injury. No cargo suffered damage. The ideal victory involved intimidation rather than violence. And Blackbeard excelled at intimidation. As Queen Anne's Revenge sailed through Caribbean waters, its reputation expanded rapidly. Merchant captains shared warnings. Port authorities exchanged reports. Rumors multiplied. Some stories exaggerated reality. Others invented details entirely. But together they created something immensely valuable. A legend. Soon, many ships surrendered simply because they believed Blackbeard was approaching. The psychological effect became one of his greatest weapons. Yet despite his fearsome reputation, the historical record presents a more complicated figure than popular imagination often assumes. Blackbeard could be ruthless, certainly, but he was not indiscriminately murderous. In fact, several surviving accounts suggest he often preferred cooperation over unnecessary bloodshed. Captured crews were frequently released, especially if they surrendered without resistance. This was practical. Dead sailors could not spread stories encouraging future surrender. Living sailors could. Every merchant crew that survived an encounter carried news throughout the Atlantic. And those stories reinforced Blackbeard's reputation. Surrender quickly, and you might survive. Resist, and the outcome could be far worse. The strategy worked remarkably well. By 1718, Blackbeard commanded not merely a ship, but something resembling a small fleet. Several vessels operated alongside him. Hundreds of men followed his leadership, and his influence stretched across much of the Caribbean and the American coastline. His most famous demonstration of power occurred near Charleston, one of Britain's most important North American ports. The event shocked colonial authorities because it revealed just how bold pirates had become. Rather than hiding among distant islands, Blackbeard positioned himself directly outside a major harbor. He intercepted vessels entering and leaving, captured passengers, and effectively blockaded the city. For days, trade halted, anxiety spread, officials struggled to respond. The situation became even stranger when Blackbeard announced his demands. He did not ask for gold. He did not ask for silver. Instead, he demanded medicine. At first glance, the request seemed surprising, but life at sea made medicine incredibly valuable. Pirates had suffered from disease constantly. Infections, parasites, fever, venereal illness, injuries. Medical supplies could mean the difference between life and death. Blackbeard understood this. His fleet needed treatment more than treasure. The authorities complied. A chest of medicines was delivered. The prisoners were released, and Blackbeard departed. The episode became legendary, not because of violence, but because it demonstrated control. For a brief moment, a pirate captain had dictated terms to an important colonial city, and succeeded. Yet even as Blackbeard reached the height of his fame, the world around him was changing. Governments had begun responding seriously to piracy. For years, authorities tolerated the problem, sometimes because they lacked resources, sometimes because corruption weakened enforcement. But patience was running out. Trade represented enormous wealth, and piracy threatened that wealth. The British government decided stronger action was necessary. One important strategy involved offering pardons. The idea was simple. Any pirate willing to surrender and abandon criminal activity could receive forgiveness. Instead of hunting every pirate individually, authorities hoped many would leave the profession voluntarily. Hundreds accepted, some because they feared capture, others because they had accumulated enough wealth and wanted a peaceful future. The policy weakened pirate networks significantly. Blackbeard himself appeared interested, at least temporarily. He traveled to North Carolina, met local officials, and accepted a royal pardon. On paper, his pirate career ended. Officially, he became a law-abiding subject once again, but reality proved more complicated. Evidence suggests Blackbeard never fully abandoned piracy. Instead, he seems to have entered a murky arrangement involving local authorities. Captured ships continued appearing, profits continued flowing, and suspicions grew. Many colonial officials throughout the Caribbean maintained ambiguous relationships with pirates. Publicly, they condemned them. But while Blackbeard's story dominated headlines, other extraordinary figures were already emerging within the pirate world. And among them were two individuals whose existence challenged almost every assumption people held about piracy. Because not all pirates were men, and the stories of Bonny and Mary Red would soon become every bit as remarkable as Blackbeard's own. When most people picture a pirate crew, they imagine a deck crowded with men, weather-beaten sailors carrying pistols and cutlasses, shouting over the roar of cannon fire. For the most part, that image reflects reality. The pirate world was overwhelmingly male. Ships were dangerous environments. Life at sea was physically demanding, and social expectations during the early 18th century left very little room for women in maritime professions. Yet history rarely fits neatly into expectations. And among the thousands of pirates who sailed the Caribbean, two women left stories so remarkable that they survived long after many famous captains had been forgotten. Their names were Bonny and Mary Read. Even today, more than 3 centuries later, their lives continue to fascinate historians because they reveal not only the possibilities available within pirate society, but also the limitations and pressures of the wider world from which pirates emerged. And Bonny's story appears to begin in Ireland. Though many details remain uncertain, like much pirate history, the surviving evidence is incomplete. What we know suggests she was born around the end of the 17th century, the daughter of a lawyer and his servant, a scandalous situation by the standards of the time. Eventually, the family relocated to the British colonies in North America. seeking a fresh start, and grew up in a world shaped by trade, expansion, and opportunity, but also by strict expectations regarding how women should behave. Most women faced limited choices: marriage, domestic life, dependence upon fathers or husbands. The boundaries were clear, and society enforced them aggressively, and appears to have possessed little interest in accepting those boundaries. Contemporary descriptions portray her as strong-willed, independent, and often quick-tempered. Whether every story about her youth is true remains impossible to know, but the consistent image is of someone unwilling to conform quietly. Eventually, she married a sailor named James Bonny, and together they moved to Nassau. The timing could hardly have been more dramatic, because Nassau had become the center of the pirate world. Every dock seemed to contain adventurers, smugglers, privateers, and outlaws. The atmosphere was unlike anything found in ordinary colonial settlements. Rules existed, but enforcement was inconsistent. Fortunes appeared suddenly and disappeared just as quickly. For someone seeking excitement, few places could compete. It was there that I met John Rackham, better known today as Calico Jack. Rackham was not the most successful pirate of his era, nor the most feared, nor the wealthiest, but he possessed charisma, and charisma often matters more than achievement. His nickname came from his fondness for brightly colored clothing, particularly calico fabrics, which helped him stand out in a world already filled with colorful personalities, and fell in love with him, or at least became deeply attached to him. The result scandalized local society. Rather than remain with her husband, she chose Rackham, and soon afterward, she entered the pirate world directly. The details vary depending upon the source, but the essential fact is beyond dispute. And Bonny became a pirate. Her decision alone was extraordinary. Yet another remarkable figure was about to enter the story. Mary Read's life may have been even more unusual. According to traditional accounts, Mary's mother disguised her as a boy during childhood. The deception reportedly helped secure financial support that otherwise might have disappeared. Whether every detail is accurate remains uncertain, but evidence strongly suggests that Mary spent much of her youth living as a male. The disguise opened opportunities unavailable to women. She worked, traveled, and even served in military campaigns. For years, people around her believed she was a man. The experience shaped her life profoundly. Unlike most women of the period, Mary became familiar with occupations traditionally reserved for males. She learned to survive in environments where physical courage and competence mattered more than social convention. Eventually, circumstances carried her toward the sea, and ultimately toward piracy. When Mary joined Rackham's crew, she initially concealed her identity. Many of the pirates apparently believed she was simply another sailor. Only later did the truth emerge, and Bonny discovered it first, at least according to the most famous version of events. The exact details remain impossible to verify, but the story has survived for centuries because it captures something fascinating about the pirate world. A place where conventional identities could become surprisingly flexible. What matters historically is that both women served aboard the same pirate vessel. Both participated actively in pirate operations, and both gained reputations for courage. When later witnesses testified about their activities, they emphasized that and Mary fought alongside male crew members during engagements. They carried weapons, boarded vessels, and faced danger directly. This was not symbolic participation, nor passive involvement. They were genuine members of the crew. Their presence challenges many assumptions about the era, not because pirate society was especially progressive. It was not. Pirates could be violent, cruel, and deeply shaped by the prejudices of their time. Yet pirate crews often valued practical ability above social status. A sailor who could fight, work, and contribute to collective success might earn acceptance regardless of background. Competence carried weight, sometimes more weight than convention. The careers of Anne and Mary were relatively brief, like most pirate careers. In reality, the Golden Age of Piracy was filled with short lives and sudden endings. Very few pirates enjoyed long careers. Disease, violence, storms, accidents, and government suppression ensured that survival remained uncertain. Every voyage carried risks. Every battle might be the last. By 1720, pressure against piracy had intensified significantly. Authorities throughout the Caribbean were coordinating efforts. Naval patrols increased. Informants supplied intelligence. And pirate captains discovered that escaping justice was becoming more difficult. Rackham's crew eventually attracted unwanted attention. In October of that year, a government vessel commanded by Captain Jonathan Barnett located them near Jamaica. The encounter exposed a reality often hidden behind pirate legends. Many pirates enjoyed drinking heavily, and on the night before the attack, much of Rackham's crew had apparently done exactly that. When danger arrived, confusion followed. Accounts suggest that several pirates remained below deck rather than rushing into battle. Whether from drunkenness, fear, or simple disorganization, their response contrasted sharply with the romantic image later generations would create. The people who fought hardest during the confrontation appear to have included Bonny and Mary Read. Witness testimony repeatedly highlighted their determination. As government forces closed in, the two women reportedly continued resisting while many others hesitated. The battle ended quickly. The pirate vessel was captured, and the crew transported to Jamaica for trial. Piracy carried severe penalties. Authorities intended to make examples of captured pirates. Trials served both legal and political purposes. They punished offenders, but they also demonstrated governmental power. The message needed to be clear. The era of tolerance was ending. The courtroom proceedings attracted enormous attention, partly because piracy fascinated the public, and partly because of the presence of Bonny and Mary Read. Women pirates remained so unusual that their cases immediately stood out. The verdict was predictable. The evidence was overwhelming. The crew was convicted, and death sentences followed. Under normal circumstances, execution would have occurred swiftly. But history took another unexpected turn. Both Anne and Mary announced that they were pregnant. Under English law, this claim required investigation. Authorities could not legally execute unborn children alongside condemned prisoners. As a result, the executions were postponed. The delay saved their lives. At least temporarily, Mary Read never regained her freedom. While imprisoned, she became seriously ill, probably from fever, and died in 1721. Her death entered official records, confirming at least the final chapter of her story. And Bonny's fate remains one of piracy's enduring mysteries. No surviving execution record has ever been found, and no definitive account explains what happened afterward. Some historians believe influential family connections secured her release. Others argue that evidence remains too limited for certainty. Several traditions claim she returned to ordinary life, married again, raised children, and lived for decades, perhaps even into old age. If true, her story would represent one of the most extraordinary survivals in pirate history. A woman who entered the pirate world, escaped the gallows, and vanished back into society, leaving historians to debate her fate centuries later. The uncertainty itself helped preserve her legend. People are often fascinated by mysteries, especially those that resist resolution. And Bonny became more than a historical figure. She became a question, a puzzle that remains unsolved. Yet while Anne and Mary attracted attention because of their gender, their stories also illuminate broader truths about piracy itself. The pirate world was not a fantasy realm populated by caricatures. It was a complex social environment, filled with people seeking opportunity, escape, freedom, profit, or survival. Some joined willingly, others reluctantly. Some pursued adventure, others simply lacked better alternatives. Every crew contained different personalities, different motives, different ambitions. What united them was life at sea, and life at sea remained extraordinarily difficult, because behind every famous pirate story, behind every battle, every treasure, every legend, there existed a daily reality that was far less glamorous than popular culture often suggests. A reality of hunger, disease, exhaustion, danger, and endless labor. To understand why men and women embrace piracy despite the risks, we must leave the legends behind for a moment and step aboard a pirate ship, not during battle, but during an ordinary day, far from land, far from treasure, far from fame, where the true nature of pirate life becomes impossible to ignore. Imagine waking before sunrise, not in a comfortable bed, not in a quiet room, but inside a crowded wooden ship rolling endlessly upon the sea. The air is thick, heavy with the smell of salt, tar, sweat, wet wood, and bodies packed together in limited space. Every movement of the vessel reminds you that there is no escape from the ocean. The ship is your world, your home, your workplace, and perhaps your future grave. For most pirates, this was daily life. The legends focus on treasure, battles, and dramatic adventures. But those moments occupied only a tiny fraction of a pirate's existence. Most days were dominated by routine, work, waiting, and survival. The sea demanded constant attention. A wooden sailing ship was not a machine that could be ignored. It was a living system, one that deteriorated constantly under the assault of wind, salt water, sun, and storms. Every rope required maintenance. Every sail needed inspection. Every plank had to be monitored for damage. If neglected, the consequences could be fatal. A pirate crew understood this better than anyone. The morning often began with cleaning. The deck had to be scrubbed, equipment checked, water inspected, tasks assigned, even aboard vessels famous for their freedom. Work remained unavoidable. A ship that wasn't maintained eventually became a wreck. And a wreck in the middle of the ocean meant death. Breakfast was rarely impressive. Popular culture often imagines pirates feasting on exotic food, but reality was much less appealing. The staple of maritime life remained hardtack, a simple biscuit designed to survive long voyages. It was dry, dense, and frequently infested with insects. Sailors sometimes joked that eating in darkness improved the experience, because then you couldn't see what was crawling inside your food. Salted meat formed another major part of the diet, usually pork or beef, preserved heavily enough to survive months at sea. Fresh food was a luxury. Vegetables disappeared quickly. Fruit disappeared even faster. The result created one of the great dangers of ocean travel: scurvy. Today we know scurvy results from a lack of vitamin C, but 18th century sailors did not understand the cause. They only understood the symptoms: bleeding gums, weakness, pain, and eventually death. Entire crews could suffer from it during long voyages. Many pirates died not in battle, but from nutritional deficiencies that modern people could prevent with a simple piece of fruit. Water posed another challenge. Fresh water stored in wooden barrels deteriorated over time. It became stagnant, unpleasant, sometimes unsafe. For this reason, alcohol often accompanied daily meals. Not because pirates were constantly celebrating, but because diluted beer, ale, or rum frequently tasted better and seemed safer than spoiled water. Contrary to myth, permanent drunkenness would have made operating a ship impossible. Successful pirate crews needed alert sailors, especially in dangerous waters. Life aboard ship alternated between long periods of boredom and brief moments of intense activity. Hours could pass with nothing visible except sea and sky. A sailor might spend an entire day watching the horizon, searching for sails, storms, or land. The work required patience, and patience can be difficult when every day looks almost identical to the one before it. To combat monotony, crews entertained themselves however they could. Stories became important. So did music. Singing helped pass time during labor. Games appeared whenever circumstances allowed. Gambling remained popular despite rules against it on many ships. Men wagered coins, clothing, food, anything that possessed value. Arguments inevitably followed, which explains why many pirate codes attempted to restrict gambling aboard ship. The goal was not morality. The goal was avoiding violence among crew members. Violence remained a constant possibility, not only from enemies, but from accidents. The sea itself was dangerous. A misplaced step during rough weather could send a sailor overboard. Falling rigging could cause severe injuries. Heavy equipment shifted unexpectedly. Storms transformed routine tasks into life-threatening challenges. A moment of carelessness sometimes proved fatal. Medical care was primitive, even by the standards of the age. Some pirate ships carried surgeons, but surgery in the early 18th century was a terrifying experience. Anesthesia did not exist in any meaningful form. Antibiotics remained centuries away. A serious wound could become a death sentence, not because of the injury itself, but because infection followed. Amputation represented one of the few available solutions for catastrophic injuries. The procedure was brutal. The patient might receive alcohol, perhaps a piece of leather to bite, and little else. Speed mattered. The faster the surgeon worked, the greater the chance of survival. Yet survival was never guaranteed. Even successful operations carried enormous risks. Those who lost limbs sometimes continued living with pirate crews, especially because pirate articles often included compensation for injuries. A man who sacrificed an arm in battle might receive financial support. The arrangement was practical. Experienced sailors remained valuable, and crews understood that anyone might become the next casualty. Weapons demanded constant maintenance as well. Pirates depended upon them. A neglected pistol could misfire. A rusted blade could fail. Gunpowder had to remain dry despite humid tropical conditions. Every crew member carried responsibility for his equipment. The iconic pirate arsenal was real. Cutlasses, pistols, muskets, boarding axes, these tools served practical purposes. The cutlass became especially popular because shipboard combat occurred in confined spaces. Long swords proved awkward among ropes, masts, and crowded decks. A shorter weapon worked better. Pistols were devastating at close range, but reloading them during combat took precious time. For that reason, many pirates carried several loaded pistols simultaneously. Fire one, drop it, draw another, continue fighting. Boarding actions represented the most dangerous moments in pirate life. Movies often portray them as exciting adventures. And from a storytelling perspective, they certainly are, but reality was terrifying. Two vessels crashed together. Smoke filled the air. Men skjuted over cannon fire, which splintered beneath impacts. Visibility vanished amid confusion. Every participant knew that a single mistake could mean death. Combat aboard ships was intimate. There was little room to maneuver, little opportunity to retreat, and very little mercy. Pirates generally preferred surrender, not from kindness, but from practicality. A merchant captain who surrendered immediately preserved his crew's lives, preserved the cargo, and avoided damaging the prize. Everyone benefited. Resistance changed the equation. Once bloodshed began, control became far more difficult. The aftermath of successful captures varied. Pirates examined cargo carefully. Popular imagination focuses on gold and jewels. Yet most prizes contained ordinary goods. Sugar, textiles, tools, alcohol, food, items that could be sold easily or used directly. A shipment of medicine might prove more valuable than silver. A cargo of food could sustain an entire crew. Pirates evaluated prizes through practical eyes. Profit mattered, but utility mattered too. Once goods were secured, the process of dividing plunder began. This was one of the most important rituals in pirate society. Fair distribution helped maintain unity. Unfair distribution created resentment, and resentment could destroy a crew. The quartermaster usually supervised the process, calculating shares, resolving disputes, and ensuring agreements were honored. For many sailors, this represented the greatest attraction of piracy. On merchant vessels, owners accumulated wealth while crews received wages. On pirate ships, success generated direct rewards. A common sailor could earn more from a single successful voyage than years of legitimate employment. That possibility remained powerful. Even though most pirates never became truly wealthy, the image of hidden treasure deserves special attention because it is one of the most enduring pirate myths. Buried treasure exists everywhere in popular culture. Maps marked with mysterious symbols. Secret islands. Chests waiting centuries to be discovered. Reality was far less romantic. Pirates almost never buried treasure. The reason was simple. Buried wealth serves little purpose. Money was meant to be spent. Pirates wanted food, alcohol, clothing, entertainment. They wanted immediate enjoyment, not hidden savings accounts beneath tropical sand. When pirates reached port, many spent their earnings rapidly. Taverns prospered because of this behavior. So did gambling houses, brothels, and merchants willing to sell luxury goods. Observers frequently remarked upon the speed with which pirate fortunes vanished. A sailor might return from a successful voyage carrying enough money to change his life, only to find himself nearly broke weeks later. This pattern frustrated authorities, but it delighted local businesses. Pirates injected enormous amounts of money into colonial economies, especially in places willing to tolerate their presence. The contradiction fascinated contemporaries. Governors condemned piracy publicly, yet merchants often profited from pirate spending. Officials denounced criminals, yet some accepted bribes. Entire communities benefited indirectly from activities they officially opposed. The relationship between pirates and colonial society remained complicated. Far more complicated than simple categories of law and crime might suggest. And that complexity helps explain why piracy survived as long as it did. Because pirates did not operate in isolation. They depended upon networks, harbors, buyers, suppliers, informants, people willing to look the other way. Without those connections, piracy would have collapsed much sooner. Yet by the early 18th century, the environment was changing. Governments had begun recognizing the scale of the problem. Trade was expanding rapidly. Colonial economies were becoming more valuable. Intolerance for piracy was disappearing. The very success of Caribbean commerce created pressure for stronger security. Powerful interests demanded action. The era when pirates could move freely through colonial ports was coming to an end. Many captains failed to recognize how serious the threat had become. Others understood perfectly. Among them was a man whose career would demonstrate both the opportunities and contradictions of the pirate age. A man who rose from obscure beginnings, led some of the most successful expeditions in Caribbean history, accumulated immense wealth, and achieved something almost unimaginable. He became not merely famous, but respectable. His name was Henry Morgan, and his journey from maritime raider to colonial governor remains one of the most extraordinary stories the Caribbean ever produced. Long before Blackbeard became the face of piracy, long before Nassau reached its peak, one man had already demonstrated just how far a life of maritime violence could carry an ambitious individual. His name was Henry Morgan, and his story remains one of the most extraordinary in Caribbean history. Because unlike most pirates, Morgan did not die in battle. He did not swing from a gallows. He did not vanish into obscurity. Instead, he climbed higher than almost anyone could have imagined, eventually becoming one of the most powerful officials in the British Caribbean. To understand how remarkable that transformation was, we must begin with a young man from Wales. Born around the middle of the 17th century, the details of his early life remain uncertain. As with many figures from this era, records are incomplete. What seems clear is that Morgan came from relatively modest beginnings. He was not born into great wealth. He was not destined for political influence, and nobody looking at his childhood would have predicted the future waiting for him. Like countless young men of his generation, he was drawn toward the sea. The Caribbean represented opportunity, a place where fortunes could be made, a place where social barriers sometimes mattered less than courage, skill, and luck. By the time Morgan arrived in Jamaica, England had only recently taken control of the island from Spain. The colony remained vulnerable. Spanish forces still threatened British interests throughout the region. Conflict was constant, and men capable of fighting possessed real value. Morgan entered a world where privateering flourished. Officially, privateers operated under government authorization. They attacked enemy shipping and settlements, keeping portions of whatever they captured. In practice, the distinction between privateering and piracy often depended upon politics. A hero in one country became a criminal in another. Morgan embraced the profession completely. He proved fearless, determined, and unusually talented. Unlike many raiders who focused on individual ships, Morgan thought bigger, much bigger. He understood that cities contained wealth far beyond what most merchant vessels carried. If those cities could be captured, the rewards would be enormous. His reputation grew rapidly. Expedition followed expedition, each more ambitious than the last, each bringing greater success and greater fame. Then came the operation that truly established his legend, the attack on Portobello. Portobello occupied a critical position within the Spanish Empire. It served as a major hub for treasure and commerce. Strong fortifications protected it. Spanish authorities believed the city could withstand most attacks. Many considered it nearly impregnable. Morgan disagreed. In 1668, he assembled a force of hundreds of men, veterans accustomed to hardship and violence. Together, they crossed the Caribbean, approaching one of Spain's most important possessions. What followed shocked the empire. Morgan's forces attacked with speed and determination. The fighting was intense. Defenders resisted fiercely, yet the attackers continued pressing forward. One defensive position fell, then another. Eventually, the city itself lay in Morgan's hands. The victory stunned contemporaries. Portobello was supposed to be secure. Its fall exposed weaknesses throughout Spain's colonial defenses, and it transformed Morgan into an international figure. News spread across oceans. Merchants discussed him. Governors discussed him. Kings heard reports about him. His name became synonymous with daring success. The wealth taken from Portobello was substantial, but perhaps more important than the money was the confidence the victory created. Morgan had proven that seemingly impossible targets could be conquered. And once a man believes almost anything is possible, his ambitions tend to expand. That is exactly what happened. Further campaigns followed. Further victories. Further riches. Each expedition increased his influence. His crews trusted him. His allies admired him. And his enemies feared him. Yet Morgan's greatest operation still lay ahead. An expedition so bold that it would become one of the most famous military adventures in Caribbean history. The target was Panama. At the time, Panama City ranked among Spain's most important colonial settlements. It served as a crucial link in the movement of wealth between South America and Europe. Treasure from Peru passed through the region. Merchants prospered there. Officials administered imperial interests from there. In strategic terms, the city mattered enormously. Attacking it required extraordinary planning. The journey alone posed serious challenges. Morgan's men had to move through difficult terrain, cross rivers, endure tropical heat, and maintain cohesion under harsh conditions. Disease threatened constantly. Supplies remained limited. Every step carried risk. Yet the expedition continued, driven by the promise of immense rewards. When Morgan's force finally approached Panama, Spanish defenders prepared for battle. What followed became one of the defining confrontations of Morgan's career. The fighting was fierce. Spanish forces attempted to halt the advance, but Morgan's men proved relentless. Discipline, experience, and determination gradually shifted the balance. Eventually, the defenders broke. The city fell, and the victors entered one of the richest prizes in the Americas. What happened afterward remains controversial even today. Panama suffered extensive destruction. Much of the city burned. Historians still debate exactly how the fire started. Some blame defenders. Others blame attackers. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. One of the empire's great cities lay devastated, and Morgan departed carrying enormous wealth. By any measure, the expedition represented a spectacular success. Yet it also created a serious problem. Politics had changed. While Morgan was conducting his campaign, diplomatic agreements between England and Spain had altered the legal situation. The raid suddenly appeared embarrassing. What had once looked like patriotic privateering now threatened international relations. Spanish officials demanded action. England could not simply ignore the complaints, at least not publicly. So Morgan was arrested. From one perspective, the moment seemed disastrous. After years of triumph, the great privateer appeared destined for punishment. He was sent to England, and many expected consequences. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Far from being treated as a disgraced criminal, Morgan became a celebrity. The public admired his exploits. Influential figures respected his achievements, and the government recognized his usefulness. Rather than destroying his career, the controversy enhanced it. Eventually, Morgan received a knighthood. A knighthood. The same man who had spent years attacking Spanish cities now carried the title Sir Henry Morgan. The transformation was astonishing, but did not end there. He returned to Jamaica, not as a prisoner, not as an outlaw, but as lieutenant governor, one of the colony's highest-ranking officials. The irony was impossible to miss. A man who had built his reputation through sanctioned plunder now helped administer colonial law. The former raider became part of the establishment. From the perspective of ordinary pirates, Morgan's story represented something almost mythical, proof that extraordinary success could overcome nearly any obstacle, proof that wealth and influence could rewrite reputations, proof that history sometimes rewards individuals who seize opportunities aggressively enough. Yet Morgan's later years reveal another side of the story. Power brought responsibilities. Administration replaced adventure. The aging privateer spent increasing amounts of time dealing with politics, property, and governance. He owned plantations, accumulated wealth, and participated in colonial society at the highest levels. The sea that had made him famous gradually receded from daily life. Time affected him as it affects everyone. Years of hard living left marks. Health problems emerged. The Caribbean climate took its toll, and eventually the great privateer reached the end of his journey. He died in 1688, not in battle, not on a scaffold, but in relative comfort, a respected figure within the society he had once challenged through violence. His funeral reflected his status. Officials honored him. Ceremonies recognized him. The transformation seemed complete. The raider had become a statesman. Yet history still held one final twist. For years later, the devastating earthquake that destroyed much of Port Royal struck Jamaica. Large sections of the city disappeared beneath the sea, including the cemetery where Morgan had been buried. His grave vanished in the harbor, lost beneath water and sediment. In a strange way, the ending feels appropriate. One of the Caribbean's most famous adventurers ultimately returned to the sea, not through sailing, but through history itself. Morgan's career reveals something essential about the pirate age. The boundaries between outlaw, privateer, merchant, and official were often less rigid than modern people imagine. Success could transform reputations. Governments frequently tolerated actions that benefited their interests, and legality sometimes shifted with political circumstances. The Caribbean was a world where fortunes changed rapidly, where today's criminal might become tomorrow's hero, and where men willing to embrace risk could achieve astonishing outcomes. But Morgan represented an exception. Most pirates did not receive knighthoods. Most did not become governors. Most never accumulated lasting wealth. The vast majority experienced much harsher endings. Some died in storms. Some died from disease. Many died at the hands of naval forces determined to restore order. And as the 18th century advanced, those forces were becoming stronger every year. The age of tolerance was fading. The great pirate havens faced growing pressure. Governments were preparing a coordinated response. And soon, the struggle between pirates and empires would enter its final chapter. A chapter that would decide whether the pirate world could survive, or whether it would disappear forever beneath the weight of state power. When people hear the word pirate, a particular image usually appears almost immediately. A wooden chest, overflowing with gold coins, jewels sparkling in the sunlight, maps marked with mysterious symbols, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a hidden island where unimaginable wealth waits beneath the sand. It is one of the most powerful images in popular culture, and for generations, it has shaped how people think about pirates. But the truth is far more interesting, because the treasure pirates actually pursued reveals a great deal about the world they lived in, and about the reasons they risked everything. The Caribbean during the 17th and early 18th centuries was one of the busiest commercial regions on Earth. Every year, thousands of ships crossed its waters, carrying goods between Europe, Africa, North America, South America, and the islands themselves. This trade generated extraordinary wealth, but not always in the form people imagine. Gold certainly existed. Silver certainly existed. Yet many of the most valuable cargoes looked surprisingly ordinary. A ship loaded with sugar could be worth a fortune. A cargo of tobacco could enrich merchants enormously. Fine textiles, medicine, tools, weapons, spices, alcohol. Every one of these commodities possessed real value. And pirates understood that value perfectly, unlike the fictional treasure hunters of later stories. Real pirates rarely searched for magical fortunes hidden in remote locations. They searched for profit, and profit came in many forms. The most famous treasure of the era originated in the Spanish Empire. For centuries, silver mines in the Americas produced staggering quantities of precious metal. Entire mountain ranges seemed to pour wealth into Spanish hands. The silver traveled through colonial networks, eventually reaching Caribbean ports before crossing the Atlantic toward Europe. Stories about these treasure fleets spread everywhere. And with good reason. The numbers were astonishing. A single successful capture could change lives. The challenge was reaching those prizes, because Spain understood their importance. Treasure fleets traveled under protection. Warships escorted them. Routes were carefully organized. Defenses remained strong. Capturing one was far more difficult than popular legends suggest. Most pirates never came close to seizing such wealth. Instead, they focused upon easier targets: merchant ships, coastal traders, poorly defended vessels carrying valuable but less glamorous cargo. A successful pirate captain learned to think like a businessman. He evaluated risks, calculated rewards, and chose targets accordingly. A cargo of cloth might not sound exciting, but if it could be sold quickly, it represented profit. A shipment of medicine could prove immensely valuable. Food supplies might sustain a crew for months. Practicality mattered far more than romance. The division of captured goods followed established customs. Every crew expected fairness. History was becoming legend, and legend was becoming larger than life. But while stories spread, governments faced a practical problem. Piracy remained expensive. Every captured merchant ship represented financial loss. Every disrupted trade route threatened economic interests. And the scale of the problem had grown impossible to ignore. The Atlantic economy was expanding rapidly. Sugar plantations generated enormous profits. Colonial commerce connected distant regions. Investors demanded protection. Merchants demanded action. Political leaders listened. By the second decade of the 18th century, a significant shift was underway. Authorities no longer viewed piracy as a tolerable nuisance. They viewed it as a serious threat. The response required coordination. For decades, pirates had benefited from inconsistency. One colony might prosecute them aggressively. Another might quietly tolerate them. Some governors accepted bribes. Others lacked resources. The result created gaps that pirates exploited skillfully. Now, governments intended to close those gaps. One of the most important tools involved offering pardons. The strategy reflected practical thinking. Hunting every pirate individually would require enormous effort. Why not encourage some to surrender voluntarily? A royal proclamation promised forgiveness to those willing to abandon piracy. The offer placed pirates before a difficult choice: continue risking everything, or accept legal protection and attempt a different life. Many chose the second option. Hundreds accepted pardons. Some genuinely retired. Others hoped to retire, only to discover that ordinary life felt far less appealing than they had imagined. Piracy had offered freedom, danger, opportunity, and occasional wealth. Returning to conventional labor often felt like a step backward. Still, the pardons weakened pirate communities significantly. Every sailor who surrendered reduced the strength of active crews. Every captain who retired diminished pirate influence. The effect accumulated over time. At the same moment, naval forces expanded operations. The Royal Navy increased its presence across the Caribbean and Atlantic. Ships patrolled important routes, investigated suspicious activity, and hunted known pirates relentlessly. This represented a major change. Earlier generations of pirates often operated in regions where government power remained distant. Now warships appeared with increasing frequency, and those warships carried officers determined to prove themselves. Success against pirates brought prestige, promotion, and recognition. Many naval commanders embraced the mission enthusiastically. The campaign extended beyond the sea itself. Authorities targeted pirate infrastructure, safe harbors, supply networks, markets willing to purchase stolen goods. All became priorities. Pirates could not survive independently. They needed places to repair ships, acquire food, sell cargo, and spend profits. Destroy those connections, and piracy became much harder to sustain. The struggle gradually shifted in favor of governments, not because pirates suddenly became weaker, but because states became stronger. They possessed resources that no pirate fleet could match indefinitely. Money, ships, soldiers, courts, administrators. The machinery of empire moved slowly, but once fully engaged, it carried tremendous weight. Captured pirates entered another stage of the conflict. The courtroom. Trials became increasingly common and increasingly important. Governments wanted more than convictions. They wanted examples. Public demonstrations that piracy led not to glory, but to punishment. The process followed recognizable patterns. Witnesses testified. Evidence was presented. Charges were read aloud. Most defendants faced overwhelming odds. Victims identified them. Captured goods connected them to crimes, and their presence aboard pirate vessels proved difficult to explain away. Some attempted defenses. They claimed coercion, claimed ignorance, claimed they had been forced into service. Occasionally, such arguments succeeded, especially if supporting evidence existed. But most trials ended predictably. Convictions followed, and convictions usually led to execution. The penalty for piracy remained death. Authorities intended the punishment to serve as a warning. Execution days attracted large crowds. Spectators gathered to witness the fate awaiting convicted pirates. The condemned marched toward the gallows, sometimes defiant, sometimes repentant, sometimes frightened, sometimes strangely calm. Their final words varied. Some warned others against following similar paths. Others remained rebellious to the end. Afterward, bodies were occasionally displayed publicly, suspended in chains near harbors, visible reminders of state authority. The message could not have been clearer. The age of easy piracy was ending. Yet despite increasing pressure, one place still stood as the beating heart of pirate resistance. A place where captains gathered, where crews found refuge, and where a remarkable experiment in pirate self-government briefly flourished. That place was Nassau, and for a short period, it would become the closest thing the world had ever seen to a pirate republic. By the middle of the 1710s, if someone wanted to find the center of the pirate world, there was one place more important than any other. A settlement surrounded by brilliant blue water, protected by shallow approaches, and crowded with men who had chosen to live beyond the boundaries of ordinary law. That place was Nassau. Today, it is known as the capital of the Bahamas, a destination visited by tourists from around the world. But 3 centuries ago, its reputation was very different. At that time, many people throughout the Atlantic viewed Nassau as something dangerous, a gathering place for outlaws, a refuge for pirates, and a direct challenge to imperial authority. The The conditions that allowed Nassau to become a pirate haven emerged from war. European conflicts had consumed enormous resources. Governments focused attention elsewhere. Colonial administration weakened. And in the Bahamas, official control nearly disappeared altogether. The islands remained strategically important, yet practical authority was limited. For pirates, the situation looked ideal. The harbor provided shelter. Nearby shipping routes offered opportunities, and government oversight remained weak. One pirate vessel arrived, then another. Before long, the settlement became a magnet, drawing sailors from across the Atlantic. Some arrived seeking fortune. Others sought protection. Many simply wanted a place where they could spend money without facing immediate arrest. The population grew rapidly, and with it, a unique society began to emerge. The famous pirate republic was never a formal nation. No constitution established it. No king ruled it. No internationally recognized government existed. Yet for a brief period, pirates effectively controlled Nassau, and they organized their affairs according to their own customs. It was a fascinating experiment, not because pirates were idealists, but because necessity required cooperation. Thousands of people cannot occupy the same community without creating rules. Even criminals need order. Ships needed repairs. Cargo needed buyers. Disputes required resolution, and resources had to be managed. The result was an informal political culture shaped largely by pirate traditions. Many of the figures who gathered there would later become legends. Benjamin Hornigold remained influential. His experience and reputation earned respect. Charles Vane arrived as well, a man who represented a more radical vision of piracy. Where Hornigold retained some loyalty to Britain, Vane rejected such distinctions. To him, any ship carrying valuable cargo represented a legitimate target. Nationality meant little. Profit meant everything. Calico Jack Rackham spent time there, as did many others who would become famous in later years. Even Edward Teach, the future Blackbeard, passed through Nassau during his rise. The harbor became a crossroads of pirate history. So many important figures appeared there that it almost seems impossible. Yet the timing explains everything. Nassau was where opportunity existed, and opportunity attracts ambitious people. Life inside the pirate settlement differed from life in conventional colonies. Merchants adapted to local realities. Some openly traded with pirates. Others did so discreetly. Taverns prospered. Shipwrights found endless work. Food suppliers earned money, and entertainment flourished. Pirates spent generously, often recklessly, which ensured a constant flow of cash through the local economy. Many residents who never sailed aboard pirate vessels still benefited from pirate activity. This created an important dynamic. Pirates did not exist separately from colonial society. They remained connected to it, dependent upon it, and in some cases, protected by it. The relationship was mutually beneficial, at least while conditions remained favorable. Within the community, pirates carried many of their shipboard traditions ashore. Important issues were discussed collectively. Influential captains exercised authority, but rarely in the manner of kings or governors. Reputation mattered enormously. A respected pirate leader could shape events through persuasion, experience, and personal prestige, yet his power depended upon continued support. This reflected the broader culture of pirate democracy, a tradition that survived even on land. Observers from outside the community often struggled to understand what they were seeing. On one hand, Nassau appeared chaotic, filled with criminals, heavy drinking, and constant risk. On the other hand, it functioned surprisingly well. Ships arrived and departed. Business occurred daily. People established routines. The settlement remained active rather than collapsing into anarchy. This contradiction fascinated contemporaries because it challenged assumptions about order. Many believed that without formal government, society would immediately descend into violence. Nassau suggested a more complicated reality. Even among outlaws, structures emerged, rules developed, and cooperation became possible. Of course, the Pirate Republic had limits, very serious limits. Its economy depended heavily upon theft. The wealth flowing through Nassau largely originated elsewhere. Merchant ships carried goods. Pirates captured those goods, and local businesses helped distribute them. The system generated profits, but did not create sustainable foundations. Without external commerce to exploit, piracy could not survive. There was another problem as well. Success attracted attention. The more powerful Nassau became, the harder it became for governments to ignore. Merchants complained loudly. Colonial officials warned London repeatedly. Reports described a growing concentration of pirates operating almost openly. The situation embarrassed authorities. Britain claimed sovereignty over the Bahamas, yet pirates effectively controlled one of its most important settlements. Eventually, the government decided enough was enough. A solution was required, and that solution arrived in the form of one man, Woodes Rogers. Rogers possessed an unusual background for the task. He understood maritime life. He understood privateering. And perhaps most importantly, he understood pirates themselves. Unlike some officials who viewed the problem only from a distance, Rogers knew the culture he was confronting. In 1718, he received appointment as governor of the Bahamas, along with clear instructions: restore order, end pirate control, and re-establish British authority. The mission would not be easy. Nassau contained hundreds of armed men. Many possessed extensive combat experience, and some had little intention of surrendering quietly. Rogers understood direct confrontation could prove costly, so he arrived carrying both threats and opportunities. Warships accompanied him, demonstrating military power, but he also carried royal pardons, offering pirates a chance to abandon their criminal careers without facing punishment. It was a clever strategy. The government recognized that not every pirate remained committed to the lifestyle. Many were exhausted. Many feared execution. Many simply wanted a safe path back into society. The pardons gave them one. When Rogers approached Nassau, the pirate community divided almost immediately. Some saw the situation realistically. They recognized that British determination had increased dramatically. Resistance seemed unlikely to succeed. For these individuals, accepting a pardon made sense. Others disagreed, and none disagreed more strongly than Charles Vane. Vane represented the uncompromising faction. He rejected reconciliation, rejected surrender, and rejected British authority altogether. As Rogers prepared to enter the harbor, Vane staged one of the most dramatic escapes in pirate history, using a captured vessel as a fire ship. He set it ablaze and sent it toward the approaching fleet. The burning ship illuminated the night, creating confusion and providing cover for escape. The attack failed to destroy Rogers's force, but it allowed Vane and several supporters to flee. They vanished into the darkness, choosing continued piracy over submission. Most pirates made a different choice. One by one, crews accepted pardons. Weapons were surrendered. Oaths were taken, and the pirate republic began dissolving. Not through a climactic battle, but through gradual surrender. The process reveals an important truth about piracy. Many pirates were not ideological revolutionaries. They were practical men. When circumstances changed, they adapted. If legitimate life offered safety, some embraced it. If piracy became too dangerous, Many abandoned it. The image of eternal rebellion belongs more to legend than reality. Once Rogers established control, transformation followed quickly. Fortifications were strengthened. Administrative systems expanded. New settlers arrived, and Nassau shifted from pirate stronghold to colonial town. The transition was not perfect, nor was it immediate, but the direction was clear. The era of pirate dominance had ended. For historians, the fall of Nassau marks one of the most significant turning points in the entire story of Caribbean piracy, because pirate communities depended upon safe havens. Without places to repair ships, sell goods, and recruit crews, operations became far more difficult. The loss of Nassau weakened piracy everywhere. Some former pirates adjusted successfully. A few entered legitimate business. Others became fishermen, farmers, or sailors aboard merchant vessels. Some even assisted authorities in hunting their former colleagues. Benjamin Hornigold himself eventually worked against pirates. An extraordinary reversal. Yet not everyone adapted. Charles Vane continued resisting, as did several others. For them, the war was not over, but they were fighting against forces larger than any individual captain. The British Empire had committed itself to suppression, and increasingly, it possessed the resources necessary to achieve that goal. The Pirate Republic had demonstrated something remarkable. For a brief moment, outlaws created a functioning community, governed largely by their own customs. But the experiment could not survive indefinitely. State power was returning, and with it came the final struggle that would bring the Golden Age of Piracy to its conclusion. The horizon was changing, the world was changing, and the days when pirates could rule entire harbors were slipping into history. By the early 1720s, the Caribbean was no longer the same world that had allowed piracy to flourish. The great pirate havens were disappearing, colonial governments had become stronger, naval patrols had become more frequent, and the network that once sustained pirate operations was slowly being dismantled. For decades, pirates had taken advantage of gaps in imperial power. Now, those gaps were closing. One by one, the conditions that had created the Golden Age of Piracy were vanishing. Merchants noticed the difference. Trade routes became safer. Insurance costs began to fall. Governors who once tolerated pirates now pursued them. And naval officers who had once struggled to locate pirate crews now found increasing success. The balance of power was shifting, and pirates could feel it. Some accepted reality. Many surrendered. Others attempted to disappear into ordinary life. A few found work aboard merchant ships. Some settled in remote communities. Others simply vanished from the historical record. Their names forgotten, their stories untold. Their lives absorbed back into the societies they had once rejected. But not everyone gave up. Some captains continued fighting. Some crews remained committed to piracy. And among the last great pirate leaders stood a man whose achievements surpassed almost everyone who came before him. Bartholomew Roberts, known throughout the Atlantic as Blackbeard. Unlike Blackbeard, Roberts did not become the most famous pirate in popular culture. Yet, by many measures, he was the most successful. His career was astonishing. Over a period of only a few years, he captured hundreds of ships, operating across enormous distances, from the Caribbean to the coast of Africa to the waters of North America. His reach was extraordinary. His discipline was famous, and his ambition seemed limitless. Roberts represented the final flowering of the pirate age, a captain who demonstrated that piracy could still be profitable, still dangerous, and still capable of challenging imperial commerce. But he also represented something else. The last major pirate whose career unfolded before governments fully established control. His success occurred during the final moments of an era that was already ending. Like many historical figures, Roberts stood at the edge of a changing world, a world that no longer had room for men like him. In February 1722, that reality arrived with brutal clarity. Off the coast of West Africa, Roberts encountered a Royal Navy vessel, the HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Ogle. The confrontation would become one of the most important battles in pirate history. Roberts chose to fight, perhaps because he had survived so many dangers before, perhaps because retreat seemed impossible. Whatever the reason, the decision proved fatal. As battle erupted, a burst of grape shots struck him in the throat. Death came almost instantly. The man who had captured hundreds of ships, the man whose name inspired fear across oceans, was gone within moments. His crew, shocked and demoralized, could not recover. Many were captured, many faced trial, and many eventually met the gallows. The death of Roberts carried symbolic importance, because it marked the end of something larger than one man's career. It marked the end of the age when pirates could still dream of challenging entire empires. After Roberts, piracy continued, but never on the same scale, never with the same influence, never with the same ability to disrupt the Atlantic world. The Great Age was over. A few isolated captains remained active. A few desperate crews continued operating, but the momentum had disappeared. Governments had won. The Caribbean entered a different era. Plantations expanded. Trade increased. Colonial administration strengthened. And the Atlantic economy grew more interconnected than ever before. For merchants and investors, this represented progress. For pirates, it represented extinction. The sea lanes that once offered freedom now offered surveillance. The islands that once provided refuge now contained officials, soldiers, and informants. The frontier was closing, and with it, the opportunities that had sustained piracy. By around 1730, the Golden Age of Piracy had effectively ended. Its most famous figures were dead, imprisoned, retired, or forgotten. The ships had vanished, the crews had dispersed, and history moved on. Yet something unexpected happened. The pirates disappeared, but the stories remained. In fact, the stories grew stronger, stronger than the pirates themselves. Almost immediately, writers began transforming real events into dramatic narratives. Some accounts were accurate, others exaggerated. Many mixed fact and fiction freely. The result was the creation of a new kind of pirate. Not the criminal described in court records, not the desperate sailor seeking profit, but the legendary pirate, the pirate of imagination. This transformation accelerated throughout the centuries. Writers found pirate stories irresistible. The Caribbean offered a perfect setting: tropical islands, hidden coves, storms, treasure, adventure, danger. Everything needed for compelling storytelling already existed. Reality provided the raw material. Imagination reshaped it. The 19th century pushed the process even further. When Robert Louis Stevenson published Treasure Island, he helped create the pirate image that many people still recognize today. Long John Silver, the treasure map, the buried gold, the tropical adventure. These elements became part of popular culture forever. Generations grew up believing they understood pirates, even when the version they knew differed greatly from historical reality. The 20th century added new layers. Movies introduced swashbuckling heroes, dramatic sword fights, romantic adventures, and colorful costumes. The pirate became less a criminal and more an anti-hero, a rebel, a symbol of freedom. Hollywood embraced the image enthusiastically, and audiences loved it. Then came a new generation of pirate stories. books, television, video games, and eventually, Pirates of the Caribbean, a film series that introduced pirate mythology to millions of people around the world. Captain Jack Sparrow became one of the most recognizable fictional characters of the modern era, and through him, many people discovered an interest in pirate history. Even if the films themselves belonged firmly to fantasy, the success of these stories reveals something fascinating. Pirates continue capturing imaginations because they represent ideas larger than themselves. Freedom, adventure, rebellion, risk, the possibility of escaping ordinary life, the possibility of choosing a different path. Whether or not those ideas reflect historical reality completely, they remain powerful. That power explains why pirate legends survived while countless other historical stories faded away. But understanding the real history matters, because the truth is often more interesting than the myth. The real pirates were not heroes, yet neither were they simple villains. They were human beings, complicated, flawed, ambitious, desperate, creative, violent, and sometimes surprisingly innovative. They created democratic systems aboard ships during an age dominated by hierarchy. They challenged authority while simultaneously committing crimes. They pursued freedom while often denying freedom to others. They embodied contradictions, just as people always do. Blackbeard was real, and Bonny was real. Mary Read was real. Henry Morgan was real. Nassau existed. Port Royal existed. The Pirate Republic existed. The treasure fleets existed. The battles happened. The trials happened. The executions happened. These were not inventions. They were part of history, and history rarely fits neatly into simple categories. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. The past is not populated by heroes and villains alone. It is populated by people. People making decisions within the circumstances they inherit. People pursuing opportunities, making mistakes, taking risks, and living with consequences. The Pirates of the Caribbean were products of their age. An age of empire, trade, slavery, exploration, and enormous economic change. They emerged from that world, thrived briefly within it, and ultimately disappeared when that world evolved beyond them. Yet their stories endured, because stories often survive longer than ships, longer than cities, longer than governments. The wooden vessels that once crossed these waters have mostly rotted away. The treasure was spent centuries ago. The guns fell silent. The crews turned to dust. Even Port Royal itself lies partly beneath the sea, but the stories remain. And perhaps that is the greatest treasure of all. Not the silver carried across oceans, not the gold hidden in strong boxes, not the fortunes won and lost in Caribbean taverns, but the stories powerful enough to survive 3 centuries. Stories capable of crossing generations. Stories that continue to inspire curiosity long after the people who live them are gone. Tonight we began with a ship moving through dark Caribbean waters, a sailor staring toward an approaching shadow on the horizon, wondering whether danger was drawing near. Now that journey reaches its end. The sea is quiet again. The sails fade into darkness. The pirate flags disappear beyond the horizon, and the golden age of piracy passes into memory. The ships have sailed. The treasure has been spent. The empires have changed. The pirates are gone, but the stories remain. And in the end, the stories may have been the real treasure all along.